Now, in the last session yesterday, we talked at quite some length about the interplay between local and global. We talked about how global brands have to adapt locally, but also how local brands expand globally. We're going to continue with that theme this morning as we look at India in particular. And our first speaker from PepsiCo is going to talk about what the West can learn from the East, even as he represents a Western company in India. He's the chairman and chief executive of PepsiCo India. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm hand, please, for Mr. Shiv Shivakumar.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and my pleasure to be here this morning. I did a similar kind of a session in London last year, so then the organizers called me back today to say, can you talk about what the West can learn from the East? I think both can learn from each other, but particularly I think as we go through a digital world, I think there's a lot more happening out in the East than in the West. So the first thing I want to call out is that we live in a mobile-first digital world. And this is where the big difference is between the East and the West. This is a mobile-first world, and it's a fully digital world. And that's why I always get surprised when people say we have a digital marketing department. I don't think in today's day and age you can talk of a digital marketing department, because marketing has to be in a digital world as opposed to having a small department which looks after something. So to me, it doesn't work. Next, I think all of human interaction before a digital world was person to person. However, in a digital world, almost all our interaction is person to machine to person, or person to app to person. So the whole world has changed in the way we are interacting with each other. Today, we trust technology far more than we trust each other. The more we have connection, it's quite likely a lot of the people are feeling more lonely. So, in a sense, this world has given us a lot of quantity of friends, but possibly we're missing out on the quality of friendship. Okay? So, in many ways, this is a profound impact and change in society. A mobile-first digital world. Why do I say that? This year, 2015, is a defining year. We have 7.5 billion SIM cards in a world with a population of 7.2 billion people. We have 5.5 billion phones, of which by the end of this year, there will be close to 3.2 billion smartphones. So the concept of a smartphone has changed significantly from 2006, when it was defined as a QWERTY keypad with a storage and a camera facility. Today, a smartphone is what the consumer makes of it, in my mind. Next, by the year 2018, 50% of the world will be on the internet. If you take away the age group 0 to 10, take away the age group beyond 65, suddenly you'll recognize that for almost every brand of yours, at least 75–80% of consumers are on the net. It has a profound impact on how brands will talk and brands will sell. Another interesting fact for 2015. This year, tablets will overtake PCs. Tablets, a category which is just under 7 years old, will overtake PCs, which is a category which has been around since the mid-70s. Okay. The pace of innovation and disruption in a digital world is absolutely staggering for anyone to see. Next, what's the impact on digital? The biggest impact, I believe, on digital is a free society, a free country. Let's look at the number of free countries since 1973. The total number of countries in 1973 was about 148. If you look at that, nearly 40 countries were not free in 1973. In 1993, 20% of countries were not free. Today, if you look at it, about 25% of the countries are not free. What is a free country? A free country is one where an individual in society has absolute freedom to express his or her opinion. And that's exactly what a digital world does to you. Every individual with a phone in his hand He's a citizen journalist, he's a commentator, he's somebody who generates content, every single thing. So the biggest profound impact of a digital world is on freedom. And we'll see more and more of this in the coming days. If you look at the GDP per capita in a country, and you look at the number of digital devices which are possible in a digital world, simply stated, any country which has less than $2,000 per capita GDP roughly has 1.4 digital devices, of which one is the mobile phone. Countries in the 2,000 to 20,000 bracket have 2 digital devices, one being the mobile phone. Countries more than $20,000 per capita have 6 digital devices. So depending on where you are in the world, you're talking of a base level, which is one mobile phone, and you're talking of 6 devices which have the power to be connected to each other and connected to everything which matters to the consumer. Okay. The bulk of emerging markets are in the first bracket, which is less than 2,000. So developing business models and developing brands and business for them is very different from developing brands for a society which has 6 digital products. How quick is this digital revolution? Time taken for 50 million users, chart for you. Radio took 38 years. Television took 13, audiovisual medium. Internet took 4 years. The iPod took 3 years. Today, at any point of time, a social networking brand is adding 200 million or more every year. That's how quick it is. It's so because finally digital is deeply personal. And I believe the next big wave will be wearables, which will move even at a faster pace. If you look at the last decade, sometimes we just don't see the staggering impact of a decade between the East and the West. Look at internet users. In 2005, the West had about 500 million internet users. In 2015, the West had 672 million internet users, about a growth of 164 million. The East had 238 million internet users in 2005. In 2015, they have 1.4 billion internet users. The East has added 1 billion internet users in the last decade. You look at fixed internet and mobile internet, all the growth has come in mobile. All the growth has come virtually in mobile. And look at the galloping nature of how much data is being transacted. So is the mobile phone here to stay? Almost certainly yes. Is the internet here to stay? Almost certainly yes. Is the social networking phenomenon here to stay? Almost certainly yes. Because social networking goes back to a deep, deep human need. The need to connect with each other. The need to know what's happening. And I think digitally, social networking does exceedingly well. Take a simple stat. India. Today's social platform, all social platform users have more circulation than all newspapers put together. Today in India. True in many countries. But India is one of the fastest growing media countries, media markets. In a country like India, social media is far bigger than all the language publications, all the language newspapers put together. Okay. So this revolution is here to stay, and a big one at that. One of the things which is happening in a mobile-first digital world is that the brand experience on mobile is a very important component of the recommendation from a consumer. So you look at this table. Each brand has its site. Each brand has some communication to the consumer via the mobile, via the other formats. In China, if the experience of the brand is good, which is 95, you almost get universal recommendation, 95. In India, if the experience is good, 96, you get, again, 95% recommendation. Brazil, 93 and 91. You can see that all the emerging markets are high 90s. Then you have the developed economies, or the Western markets, where it's much more the 70s and 80s. And equally, the recommendation is far lower. So the digital influence on consumers in terms of what they are going to talk about in terms of brands is very significant. This is one thing which I believe the West also will learn in a future world. It's already happening in the East because the East has frog-leaped, significantly in terms of consumption. So what does this mean in terms of aspiration and role of brands? The biggest difference between the East and the West is that brands matter to consumers' life. Advertising is not an interruption of daily activity. Advertising in many cases is entertainment. Advertising is something people look forward to. Brands is something people associate with. Brands are typically bought because they're either allies or crutches. In most of Eastern markets, some brands are allies, many brands are crutches. They give the consumer a definition of his or her personality. A lot of the West commentary has been on, will brands exist, a no-brand era, etc. That's absolutely not true. Brands will always exist as long as there are emotions involved with human beings. The day there are no emotions in a human being, that's when brands will not exist. So brands have a fundamental central role to play in every consumer's life, be it East or West, but they play a significant role, a far bigger role in the Eastern markets. So every time we've noticed the drivers of big brand purchase, aspiration is very, very big. Quality is very, very big in the Eastern world. And the right value for money for a brand is very big. All three are important lessons for any marketeer, East or West. But the biggest difference between Eastern brands and the way Eastern consumers consume brands is the aspiration. That's the fundamental difference between the East and the West. The brand philosophy. We've always said, as brand marketeers, that the consumer is king. Absolutely correct. In a digital world, there are two other things which come into play. The consumer has a very big voice. Earlier, the consumer was king because you served the consumer. The consumer didn't have voice to tell you something back. But today, in a digital world, he'll tell that back to you in double quick time in a few seconds. The third thing we are all realizing as brand marketeers, the consumer is part of many common interest communities. And suddenly, when the consumer has a challenge or an issue or an opportunity, the whole community backs him. That's not what we saw 15 years ago in a physical world. Today, the consumer is king, sure enough. He or she has got a voice, and he or she is part of many interest communities which have an influence on brand marketing. All three are important. And I think brand marketeers need to recognize this. The one thing we notice is an absolute multiplication of local content. Every single consumer is now like a newspaper or a magazine or whatever it is. He or she generates far more content than the whole world put together a few years ago. Consumer-generated content is going to be one of the biggest things. And we are seeing this again and again. We've just put out a make-your-own ad for Pepsi in India. We're already deluded, absolute deluded, with the number of responses we have. Okay, so here are people, we give them a set of tools, and they go and make an ad and send it back to us. The jury judges said the best ad goes on. This is an idea we picked from PepsiCo for the Super Bowl. Okay? A big initiative. No brand's ever tried this in India before. Happening right now. April 8th is when it will start. Okay? So fundamentally, we have the courage to say, here's our tools. Please make a great ad for us. Okay? That's how far marketers will trust consumers, and consumers will develop stuff for brands. Next, the whole concept of mobile advertising. The missed call business, which even Facebook is now turning into a big business model, where you put a missed call, put something out on Facebook, and the company or the brand calls you back and starts discussing with you. The opportunities for business model disruption, thanks to digital, are absolutely many. Many, many, and we're just seeing the early signs of some new business models. A bulk of the business models in the technology area are what we call the freemium models. Give away something free, monetize it later. I think many, many industries will be affected by the new business models from the mobile sector. But one challenge is there, and specifically where the East will really rally very, very fast, is mobile payments. As and when the regulations open up in each and every country, whether it's Africa, whether it's Southeast Asia, etc., this will gallop commerce. Today, 21% of the world does not have access to financial instruments. So the first access to a financial instrument will really take an economy and the consumer experience significantly forward. All of the West can learn from Kenya. 63% of the Kenyan GDP runs on the mobile phone. All the payments are via the mobile phone. That's an absolute benchmark in terms of how you can transform a society, not just from cash, but from plastic cards straight into mobile payments. It's been going on for some time now. I believe more and more of that will happen. And the more you have mobile payments, the easier it will be for commerce, for industry, and everybody. Imagine all the subsidies given by government. They can go straight into the mobile phone of the consumer, taking away all the inefficiencies of the system and the middlemen. So the benefits of mobile payments will be humongous, both for consumption as well as for development. This is an area where the West can pick a lot from the East. Let's look at brands and passions. This is a study globally. What are the top 4 passions which come out in a digital world? Social networking, number 1. Music, number 2. News, number 3. Gaming, number 4. These are the 4 big passions. Social networking is number 1 almost everywhere. Not surprisingly, because people have this hunger to reconnect with each other. Music, 81%. But music is number 1 in India. In India, music is the number 1 passion. 3, news, 78% globally. In China, Vietnam, news is the leader, number 1. Gaming, 65%. Gaming is very interesting. You put a 2x2 box to say young and old, men and women, it roughly splits equally between the 4 boxes. It's an amazing thing. So the number of women who are into digital gaming is high. That's a huge opportunity, and this is true in many, many emerging markets. So the 4 boxes in gaming split roughly equally. I think 20 is the least of the 4 boxes. So brands have a lot to connect consumers with. I said at the start that the more we are connected, it's quite likely that some of the people feel more lonely. And one of the important things for brands and the society is to connect people with their passions. These are the passions which will matter to consumers, and hence brands have to recognize them in order to connect their consumers to their passions. This is a recent study, local versus global in a digital world. If you look at this, trust is similar whether it's local or global. Interesting. On the local side, what truly wins on the local side is anything to do with purchase. I talked about mobile payments. Anything to do with content, ease of content, relevance of content. So almost all content, the trust there is much more local. What's on the other side? The latest information, the best content. So global truly has a role to say, this is the benchmark we set in any sector or industry. But the relevance and the purchase will always happen at a local level. So whatever you're doing in a digital world, there is a place for global in 2-3 parameters. Trust is universal, whether it's local or global. And almost all content, local relevant content will always outscore anything else that you put out. The one big difference I see now is in the area of trust. Today, trust is earned and lost on a daily basis. On a daily basis. It has a big implication on how brands will respond to consumers and what they're talking about us. In global studies on trust, the number 1, there are 4 institutions they check. The NGOs, the government, the media, and business. Globally, NGOs score most on trust. In India, business scores most on trust. And by and large, in most places, government and media have scored lower on trust this year. Brand trust moves up and down. I'm sure somebody spoke to you yesterday from an airline. If you handle it right, you get a lot of trust. You handle one day wrong, you lose a lot of trust. So your clock is reset every morning at 6 o'clock. And you have to win trust back 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. non-stop. If you are not able to respond to consumers on a daily basis, your trust and whatever associated with the trust, business, XYZ, will all be lost. So in a digital world, if you're a marketer, you have to seriously think about how you develop this concept called trust. Trust in a physical world was more enduring, many more years. In a digital world, that's not true. So every morning, 6 o'clock, reset the trust meter. So how do I see the future marketing department? I believe the future marketer and the department has to be very humble. Number 2, you need to be extremely responsive. And number 3, I believe we will see a lot more data scientists in the marketing department because the sheer number of data points will be humongous. A brand with even a 10 million consumer base or 20 million consumer base, the sheer number of data points through the day will stagger anybody. So we will get into real-time decision-making based on data. This is the kind of marketing department that all of you will see. A humble, a more responsive, filled with data scientists. E-commerce. A lot has been said about e-commerce. And if you look at the development of e-commerce models, technology is obvious, books is obvious, apparel is obvious, music is obvious. The not so obvious one is the FMCG sector. In a simple thumb rule, the physical delivery and cost always matters even in e-commerce. If the physical delivery and cost is between 60 cents to $2, your trade margin plus discounts have to be 3 times that. Otherwise, you cannot do it on your own, which basically means you have to network with a bunch of allies and develop an ecosystem in order to do this. In the East, we have a number of mom-and-pop stores. The evolution of e-commerce in East will be dramatically different from what's there in the West right now. And I think the West will pick many of the nuances of the Eastern markets. So in summary, we live in a mobile-first digital world. We have 7.5 billion SIM cards, 5.5 billion phones, 3.2 billion smartphones. Internet, by the year 2018, 50% of the world will be connected by internet. For your specific consumer target, it will be anything between 75 to 80%. The whole relationship between a brand and a consumer and what matters to him or her and her passions will matter to brands. Consumers have a voice, and consumers are connected to a community. And I think all brands have to recognize that. The development of e-commerce in the Eastern world will set many new business models because you will come with an alliance in order to make it effective. So that's all I had to say, ladies and gentlemen. I have 2 more minutes to close. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you. Shiv Shivakumar from PepsiCo in India. What questions would you like to ask? Yes. Noor, hello. The microphone will come your way.
Hi, I represent Digital Market Asia. When you started your presentation, you made a very valid point about the marketing departments in the digital departments in marketer side and the fact that it shouldn't just be a department. However, we see that many companies, PepsiCo included, has a chief digital officer. So when we are thinking of thought process where there shouldn't be digital departments, how does the role of a chief digital officer change? Does it stay? Does it go away?
Good question. Thank you for asking that.
And when are you sacking him? or renaming him, I suppose.
So when you start a journey in any function or activity, IT as an example, you have a chief information officer, right? So when you start, till the company gains critical mass and critical capability or competency, you would do that. Once the whole company has it, then you don't need a specific call-out function. Okay, that's how most functions have evolved, and I see that happening even in digital. Most technology companies don't have a department called digital. What they are focused on is now marketing in a digital world. Okay.
So in 2015, do we still have the chief digital officer
I think a lot more companies will evolve. A lot more companies will evolve into being, much more of a digital. A number of the companies you must recognize have started in a physical world.
I guess her point is, do you actually have a chief digital officer still?
No, not in India. We don't have a chief digital officer in India. We have a digital department, yeah. Not a chief digital officer.
Right.
I think that's a good question. Let me
just repeat it so that everybody else can hear.
The question
was, will you have a chief trust officer?
Will you have a chief trust officer? Now, here's the catch, and it's a very good question. 10 years ago, the CEO and the board of a company or the management team of a company were accountable for 10 parameters or measures. Today, they're accountable for 50. One of them is trust. So you can't pull out each measure which the society wants you to be responsible for and put a person for that or a department for that. It doesn't work. And I believe a future company is one where the management team has distributed leadership and shared accountability for a number of these things.
In other words, it's everybody's role to be
everybody's role,
the chief
absolutely.
trust officer. But doesn't that then also raise the problem that if we are perceiving every message that comes from a brand as a sales message, maybe not so much in emerging markets, you were saying that. In emerging markets, it's part of the entertainment and the desire, for, I suppose, to move up in the world. But can we ever get to a point where we fully trust brands more than our friends on Facebook, our quality friends on Facebook, that is?
I don't know. I think that's a difficult question. Depends on society, depends on evolution of society, etc. There will always be some brands which will have outstanding trust, okay? And they will vary from country to country. But what I'm seeing definitely in the digital world is that people trust the opinion of their friends and their family far more than anything else.
Maybe we should have a quick straw poll. Could we have a show of hands, please? Who here trusts their least trusted friend on Facebook more than your pick of a brand? Because we all trust our best friends, right? But who here trusts their least trusted friends on Facebook more than a brand? Couple of hands.
10,
right.
15, yeah.
So we do, I mean, in other words, and I suppose this substantiates the point that it's harder for a brand to build that trust than even your least trusted friends. So how do you do that? How do you inculcate that throughout the organization?
Here's the thing about brands. Every brand stands for a promise. And every time it keeps exceeding the promise to consumers, it keeps gaining more and more trust. And every time it takes away from that promise, it keeps losing trust.
Like a bank account.
Absolutely.
You make deposits.
The heart of a brand is the promise it has made, and that connection with consumers should not be broken. That's it.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Wait, if you wouldn't mind just leaving the time for the microphone to come your way.
I was taken aback by the omission in the chart of the connection points between brands and passions. I'd have thought that sports, by default, should be one of the most natural things that comes as the connection, whether it's be soccer in the West world or cricket in a country like India, which really bonds, which has an opportunity at least to bond between brands and consumers. Your point of view?
No, see, if you aggregate it for the whole population, sport doesn't come in the top four. Social networking, gaming, etc., far outscore. That's basically because I believe that they have a wider appeal to consumers. Okay, sport in some cases could be much more male as opposed to a broader audience.
We can talk about the Australia versus India match in the cricket maybe after the session. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks once again to Shiv Shivakumar from PepsiCo in India.